Jason carefully adjusted his tie, glancing at his reflection in the hallway mirror. The soft hum of cartoons drifted from the living room, where his 6-year-old daughter, Lily, sat cross-legged on the rug, clutching her favorite stuffed bunny. "Be good for Mommy, okay," he said, leaning down to kiss Lily's forehead. Lily looked up at him with her wide, curious eyes. "Okay, Daddy. Are you coming home late again?" Jason sighed, guilt tugging at his chest. "Just a little late, sweetheart. Work is busy." Behind him, Emily entered the room, smiling warmly. Her floral dress swayed as she walked, and her auburn hair caught the sunlight streaming through the windows. "Don't worry, we'll save you some dinner," she said, handing him his packed lunch. Jason gave her a quick kiss on the cheek and headed out, his mind already occupied with the day's workload. He didn't notice the way Emily's smile faded as the door closed behind him. Lily was a talkative child, full of stories and questions that often left Jason and Emily stifling laughter. That evening, as they sat around the dinner table, she began recounting her day in vivid detail. "And then, Uncle Ben came over again," Lily said, swinging her legs under the chair. "He brought me candy." Jason paused mid-bite. "Uncle Ben?" Emily's fork clattered softly against her plate. "Oh, you know, just a neighbor," she said quickly. "He's been helping with some things around the house while you're at work." "Really?" Jason asked, raising an eyebrow. He didn't recall meeting any neighbors named Ben. "It's nothing," Emily said, brushing it off. "Just small favors." Jason shrugged, deciding not to press further. Lily, however, wasn't done. "He's so funny, Daddy." "He makes Mommy laugh all the time," Lily added, her innocent words sending an unexpected chill down Jason's spine. The next morning, Jason left for work as usual, but the conversation lingered in his mind. Who was Uncle Ben? And why hadn't Emily mentioned him before? He tried to shake off the nagging feeling, reasoning that it was probably just a harmless neighborly interaction. Still, curiosity gnawed at him. That evening, as he settled onto the couch, something caught his eye. Tucked between the couch cushions was a crumpled candy wrapper. He smoothed it out, recognizing the bright logo of a brand they never bought. Jason stared at it for a long moment before slipping it into his pocket. Days turned into weeks, and Uncle Ben became a recurring character in Lily's daily updates. "Uncle Ben fixed the wobbly chair," she'd say, or, "Uncle Ben brought me a new coloring book." Each time, Jason's unease grew. Emily's explanations were always brief and dismissive. "He's just being helpful," she'd say, avoiding Jason's gaze. One afternoon, Jason's boss let him leave work early, a rare reprieve from his demanding schedule. As he drove home, he felt a pang of excitement at the thought of surprising Emily and Lily. But as he turned onto their street, his excitement curdled into confusion. A silver sedan was parked in their driveway. Jason didn't recognize the car. Jason entered the house quietly, his footsteps muffled by the carpet. Voices drifted from the living room, Emily's light laughter mingled with a man's deeper tone. Jason's jaw tightened as he stepped closer. "Oh, Ben, you're too much," Emily said, her laugh echoing through the hallway. Jason's pulse quickened. He peeked around the corner and saw Emily sitting on the couch, her posture relaxed, her smile wide. Beside her sat a man with dark hair and an easy grin. He held a mug in one hand, gesturing animatedly with the other as he spoke. Jason stepped into the room, his presence startling both of them. "Oh. Jason, you're home early," Emily said, her voice unnaturally bright. The man, Ben, Jason presumed, stood and extended a hand. "You must be Jason." "I'm Ben. Emily's told me so much about you." Jason shook his hand, noting the firm grip and confident demeanor. "Nice to meet you," he said flatly. Emily quickly stood, her cheeks flushed. "Ben was just leaving," she said, ushering him toward the door. Ben chuckled. "No rush, but I should get going." "Thanks for the coffee, Emily." He gave Jason a polite nod before leaving. As the door closed, Jason turned to Emily. So, that's Uncle Ben? Emily crossed her arms. What's that supposed to mean? Jason held up the candy wrapper he'd found days earlier. Lily says he brings her candy and spends a lot of time here. Why haven't you mentioned him before? Emily's eyes narrowed. Because it's not a big deal, Jason. He's a neighbor who's been helping out while you're working late. Jason stared at her, searching for any sign of dishonesty. Her defensiveness only deepened his suspicion. I'd appreciate it if you told me next time someone's spending so much time in our house, he said quietly. Emily rolled her eyes. Fine. If it bothers you that much. That night, Jason lay awake, staring at the ceiling. He couldn't shake the image of Emily and Ben, laughing together on the couch. Lily's innocent words echoed in his mind, he makes mommy laugh all the time. The cracks in their seemingly perfect life were beginning to show, and Jason was determined to find out what lay beneath. The following days passed uneventfully, but Jason couldn't shake the lingering tension. His encounter with Ben had planted a seed of doubt, and Emily's evasiveness only made it grow. He started paying closer attention to her habits, noticing the little things he'd once dismissed, her phone always face down on the table, the way she glanced at the clock when he mentioned staying late at work, the sudden uptick in errands that seemed to coincide with his busiest days. Jason's curiosity became an obsession. One evening, while Emily was in the shower, he picked up her phone. His hands trembled as he unlocked it using her familiar passcode. He felt a pang of guilt but told himself it was justified. The messages were unremarkable, exchanges with friends, reminders about Lily's activities. But one thread caught his eye. It was under the name Ben, and it wasn't overtly incriminating, but the tone was too friendly for Jason's comfort. Ben, thanks again for yesterday. You're a lifesaver. Emily, anytime. You know I'm happy to help, smiley face. Jason stared at the screen, his stomach twisting. He quickly put the phone back where he found it before Emily emerged, humming softly, unaware of his turmoil. Jason decided to take a more subtle approach. The next morning, he purchased a small, discreet camera online. For Lily's safety, he rationalized, though he knew the real reason. A few days later, it arrived. He installed it in the living room, cleverly hidden among the family photos on the bookshelf. This will help us keep an eye on Lily when we're not around, he explained to Emily as he set it up. She nodded absent-mindedly, her attention on her phone. The first day of footage was uneventful, Lily coloring at the coffee table, Emily tidying up, the usual hum of household life. But on the second day, Jason's heart stopped. The video showed Ben entering the house mid-morning, carrying a bag. Emily greeted him with a warm smile, her body language relaxed and familiar. They sat on the couch, chatting and laughing. At one point, Emily touched his arm briefly, and Jason's stomach churned. The interaction wasn't outright damning, but it was far too comfortable for Jason's liking. He watched the footage again and again, scrutinizing every detail, searching for hidden meaning in their gestures and expressions. By the time Emily returned home that evening, Jason was barely holding himself together. "How was your day?" Emily asked cheerfully as she set her keys on the counter. Jason forced a smile. "Same as always." "You?" "Pretty quiet," she replied, her voice even. The lie hit him like a punch to the gut, but he didn't confront her. "Not yet." Over the weekend, Jason mulled over his next move. He decided to start coming home early on random days, without telling Emily. On Monday, he left work at noon, his heart pounding as he drove home. When he pulled into the driveway, there was no unfamiliar car, no sign of Ben. But inside, he found a clue, a second mug on the kitchen counter, still warm. Jason's jaw tightened as he rinsed it out, his mind racing. Lily was upstairs, playing with her dolls, and Jason took the opportunity to ask her some questions. "Hey, sweetheart," he said, sitting on the edge of her bed. "Did anyone come over today?" Lily nodded without looking up from her toys. "Uncle Ben. He brought me a juice box." Jason swallowed hard. "Did you have fun?" "Uh-huh. Mommy and Uncle Ben were laughing a lot. "He's really funny, Daddy." Jason forced a smile. "That's nice." That evening, Jason checked the camera footage. Sure enough, Ben had been there, staying for nearly 2 hours. Most of the time, he and Emily sat on the couch, talking. At one point, Ben pulled out his phone and showed Emily something, prompting laughter and an extended conversation. The scene played out like a casual visit between close friends, but to Jason, it felt like betrayal. He knew he needed to confront Emily, but his mind raced with doubt. What if he was wrong? What if his suspicions were poisoning an innocent friendship? But what if he wasn't? On Wednesday, Jason's opportunity came. Emily mentioned that she needed to run errands in the morning and might be gone for a few hours. Jason pretended to head to work, but instead parked down the street, waiting. Sure enough, an hour later, Ben's silver sedan pulled into the driveway. Jason's hands gripped the steering wheel as he debated his next move. Should he storm in and demand answers? Or wait and gather more evidence? His heart pounded as he watched Ben enter the house, the door closing behind him. An hour passed. Then 2. Jason's patience wore thin, and he finally decided to act. He got out of the car and approached the house, his footsteps heavy with determination. As he reached the front door, he heard laughter from inside. His stomach churned, but he forced himself to knock. The laughter stopped abruptly. Moments later, the door opened, and Emily's face appeared, her expression a mix of surprise and guilt. "Jason," she said, her voice faltering. "What are you doing here?" "I could ask you the same thing," Jason replied, his gaze darting past her to the living room where Ben stood, looking uncomfortably out of place. Emily hesitated, then stepped aside. "Come in. Let's talk." Jason entered, his pulse racing. The tension in the room was palpable as he faced the man who had become an unwelcome fixture in his life. "So," Jason said, his voice tight. "What exactly is going on here?" The silence in the living room was oppressive as Jason stood face to face with Ben. Emily hovered nearby, wringing her hands nervously. The air buzzed with unspoken accusations and barely contained tension. "Jason," Emily began, her voice strained. "This isn't what you think." "Then tell me what it is," Jason said, crossing his arms. His eyes didn't leave Ben, who shifted uncomfortably under the scrutiny. Ben cleared his throat. "Look, maybe I should go," he said, taking a step toward the door. "Not so fast," Jason said sharply. "You've been in my house, spending time with my wife and daughter, and I'd like to know why." Emily stepped between them, her voice rising. "Ben's an old friend. He's just been helping me with a few things around the house. That's all." Jason's jaw tightened. "Helping with what, exactly?" "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like he's been making himself a little too comfortable." Ben raised his hands defensively. "Hey, man, I don't want any trouble. I've just been helping Emily out with some repairs and errands. That's it." Jason took a step closer. "Then why does my daughter keep telling me how much time you spend here? How you make her mommy laugh? Doesn't sound like just repairs and errands to me." Emily's face flushed. "Jason, stop. You're making this into something it's not." Jason pointed at her. "I'm making this into something? You're the one who's been lying to me, Emily." He turned to Ben. "And you've been lying, too. Or do you always use a fake name?" Ben froze, his expression shifting to one of alarm. "What are you talking about?" Jason pulled a wallet from the coat closet, one he'd found earlier tucked behind a pile of jackets. He tossed it onto the coffee table, and an old ID card slid out. The photo was unmistakably Ben's, but the name read Thomas Bennett. "Care to explain that, Ben, or should I call you Thomas?" Jason said, his voice cold. Emily's eyes darted to Ben, her expression panicked. "Ben, what is this?" Ben hesitated, his jaw tightening. "It's not what it looks like," he said finally. "Then what is it?" Jason demanded. Ben exhaled heavily. Thomas Bennett is my legal name, but everyone calls me Ben. It's not some big conspiracy. Jason wasn't convinced. Why hide it? Why not tell my wife the truth? Emily interjected, her voice cracking. Jason, please. You're jumping to conclusions. Jason rounded on her. Then why didn't you tell me about him? Why has this all been happening behind my back? Emily's lips parted, but no words came out. Her silence was deafening. That night, the tension remained thick between Jason and Emily. Ben had left hastily, muttering vague apologies, but Jason's questions were far from answered. Emily went to bed early, avoiding further confrontation, but Jason stayed up, staring at the hidden camera footage on his laptop. He rewound and replayed every interaction, every glance and gesture between Emily and Ben. The next morning, Jason decided he couldn't rely on Emily to tell the truth. He needed more evidence. Leaving for work, he parked his car a few blocks away and walked back to the house, careful to remain out of sight. From a neighbor's yard, he had a clear view of the living room through the large front window. It didn't take long. Around mid-morning, the silver sedan pulled into the driveway. Jason's heart raced as Ben walked up to the house and knocked. Emily answered almost immediately, greeting him with a warm smile. Jason clenched his fists as Ben stepped inside and the door closed behind them. He felt like an intruder in his own life, watching a scene that shouldn't exist. But he didn't move. He needed to know what was really happening. Hours later, Jason sat at his desk at work, staring blankly at his computer screen. The footage from the camera had revealed nothing conclusive, just more of the same: conversation, laughter, shared looks. It was maddening. He couldn't decide whether he was overreacting or not reacting enough. His phone buzzed, pulling him from his thoughts. It was a text from Emily. Running a little late tonight. Don't wait up for dinner. Jason's pulse quickened. He checked the GPS tracker he'd discreetly placed under her car days ago. She wasn't at the grocery store or running errands. She was heading downtown. Jason left work early and drove to the address the tracker indicated. It was a small cafe on a quiet street. Through the window, he saw Emily sitting at a corner table with Ben. They leaned in close, their conversation animated. Jason's chest tightened as he watched. He entered the cafe, his presence causing heads to turn. Emily froze when she saw him, her expression a mix of shock and guilt. Ben's face darkened, his confident facade faltering. Jason, what are you doing here? Emily asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I could ask you the same thing, Jason replied, his gaze flicking between her and Ben. Care to explain why you're here instead of running errands? Emily opened her mouth to speak, but Ben cut her off. This isn't what it looks like. Jason's temper flared. Then what is it? Because it looks like you've been lying to me for weeks. The room seemed to shrink as the three of them sat in tense silence. Finally, Emily spoke. Jason, she said, her voice trembling. We need to talk. But not here. Back at home, Jason and Emily faced each other in the living room, the unspoken accusations hanging heavy in the air. I've been helping Ben, Emily said finally. He's in trouble, and he needed someone to talk to. Jason's brow furrowed. In trouble? With what? Emily hesitated, glancing away. It's complicated. Try me, Jason said, his voice hard. Emily sighed, her shoulders sagging. He owes money to some people. Dangerous people. I've just been trying to help him figure things out. Jason stared at her, incredulous. And you didn't think to tell me? You let this stranger into our home, around our daughter, without saying a word? Emily's eyes filled with tears. I didn't want to drag you into it. I thought I could handle it. Jason shook his head, anger and disbelief swirling inside him. This isn't just about Ben. This is about trust, Emily. And right now, I don't know if I can trust you. The weight of his words hung between them, a chasm widening with every passing second. And Jason couldn't shake the feeling that there was still more to the story, more that Emily wasn't telling him. The house was oppressively quiet in the days following Jason's discovery. Emily avoided his questions, deflecting with vague reassurances that only fueled his frustration. Jason felt like a stranger in his own home, his trust in Emily shattered and his mind plagued with doubts. If she had been lying about Ben, what else was she hiding? Jason decided he couldn't wait for Emily to come clean. He needed answers, and he was willing to dig for them. That evening, while Emily was putting Lily to bed, Jason searched the house for anything that might shed light on her connection to Ben. His search led him to the drawer in the desk where Emily often worked on household paperwork. At first, the drawer yielded nothing unusual: old bills, Lily's school forms, and some loose receipts. But tucked in the back was a sealed envelope with Ben's name scrawled on the front. Jason's heart pounded as he opened it. Inside was a handwritten note. Ben, this is the last time I can help. Please don't come back after this. I can't risk Jason finding out. There was also a folded check, made out to cash, for an amount that made Jason's stomach drop. He stared at the note and the check, his mind racing. Emily had been giving Ben money, their money. For what? Jason didn't confront Emily immediately. Instead, he waited until the next morning. Over breakfast, he tried to keep his tone casual. So, what's the deal with Ben, really? He asked, sipping his coffee. Emily stiffened. Jason, I told you. He's just a friend who needed some help. Help with what? Jason pressed. Because I found the note in the desk. And the check. Emily's face drained of color. She set her fork down, her hands trembling slightly. You went through my things? Don't turn this around on me, Jason snapped. You've been lying to me, giving him money, and bringing him into our house. I deserve to know what's going on. Emily took a deep breath, avoiding his gaze. Ben got into some trouble. He owes money to some dangerous people, and he came to me for help. I didn't want to involve you because I knew how you'd react. How I'd react? Jason's voice rose. You mean like this? Being angry that my wife is keeping secrets and siphoning off our money? Emily flinched. It's not like that. I was just trying to help him. And what if these dangerous people decide to come here? What then? Jason demanded. Emily opened her mouth to respond, but before she could, the doorbell rang. Jason's instincts told him to be cautious. He walked to the door and peered through the peephole. To his surprise, it was Ben, standing on the porch, his expression tense. Jason hesitated before opening the door. We need to talk, Ben said, his voice low. Jason stepped aside reluctantly, letting Ben in. Emily's face tightened when she saw him. What are you doing here? She asked, her voice sharp. You didn't answer my calls, Ben said. We have a problem. Jason crossed his arms. You bet we do. Start talking. Ben glanced at Emily, then back at Jason. He hesitated before speaking. The people I owe money to found out about the check. They're not happy, and they want more. I need your help. Jason's temper boiled over. My help? You've already dragged my wife into this mess, and now you want more? Jason, please, Emily said, stepping forward. If we don't help him, they might come after all of us. Jason stared at her, incredulous. This is unbelievable. You're still defending him? Ben raised his hands. I didn't want any of this, okay? I'm just trying to fix it. Jason shook his head. Get out of my house. Now. Ben looked at Emily one last time before nodding and leaving. The door closed with a heavy finality, but the tension in the room remained. That night, Jason couldn't sleep. He lay awake, staring at the ceiling, his mind replaying the day's events. Emily's betrayal and Ben's intrusion into their lives felt like a wound that wouldn't stop bleeding. By morning, Jason had made a decision. He called a private investigator, determined to get to the bottom of Ben's story. If Emily wouldn't give him the truth, he'd find it himself. The investigator worked quickly, and within days, Jason had a file of information on Ben. His real name was indeed Thomas Bennett, and he had a long history of financial scams and gambling debts. But what alarmed Jason most was the discovery that Ben wasn't just a grifter, he had ties to a criminal organization known for extortion and violence. Jason felt a chill as he read through the report. This wasn't just about money. Ben's involvement in their lives was far more dangerous than Emily had let on. Armed with this new information, Jason confronted Emily again. He placed the file on the kitchen table and slid it toward her. "Read it," he said. Emily hesitated but obeyed, her face paling as she flipped through the pages. "You knew," Jason said, his voice low. "You knew he was dangerous, and you still brought him into our home." Emily's hands trembled as she closed the file. "I didn't know the extent of it. I thought I could help him." Jason leaned forward, his anger barely contained. "You put our family at risk. Do you understand that?" Lily could have been hurt. Tears streamed down Emily's face. "I'm sorry, Jason. I didn't mean for any of this to happen." Jason stood, his chair scraping against the floor. "Sorry isn't enough. I need time to think." Emily reached for him, but he pulled away, walking out the door and leaving her alone with the weight of her choices. Jason sat in his car outside the house, the engine idling as the evening sun dipped below the horizon. He stared at the front door, unsure if he was ready to face the chaos waiting inside. The weight of Emily's betrayal and Ben's dangerous connections pressed down on him like a suffocating blanket. When he finally stepped inside, the house was eerily quiet. Emily sat at the dining table, her face pale and drawn. She had been crying, her red-rimmed eyes gave her away. "Jason," she said, standing as he entered. Her voice wavered. "I didn't know if you'd come back." Jason set his bag down and crossed his arms. "I'm here. But we need to talk, and I need the full truth this time." Emily nodded slowly, sinking back into her chair. She hesitated, as though gathering the courage to speak. Finally, she began. Emily confessed everything. She had met Ben years ago through mutual friends, long before she and Jason had married. Ben had always been charming but reckless, a gambler who lived for the thrill. When he resurfaced months ago, he had come to her desperate and panicked, claiming he owed money to people who would hurt him if he didn't pay up. At first, it was just small amounts, Emily said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I thought I was helping an old friend. But then he kept coming back, and I didn't know how to say no." "So you gave him more money?" "Our money?" Jason's voice was cold. Emily flinched but nodded. "Yes. And when that wasn't enough, he started asking for other favors, using my connections, giving him information. I didn't realize how deep he was in until it was too late." Jason leaned forward, his jaw tight. "What kind of information?" Emily hesitated, then said, "Some contacts from my old job. He said it would help him secure loans." "I didn't think," she trailed off, unable to meet Jason's eyes. Jason's chest tightened with anger. "You didn't think. That's the problem, Emily. You didn't think about the consequences, for you, for me, for Lily." The next morning, Jason resolved to take matters into his own hands. He called the private investigator and arranged to meet with the authorities. It was a difficult decision, knowing it could bring legal trouble for Emily, but Jason was determined to protect his family from Ben and the dangerous people he had entangled them with. Within days, law enforcement had tracked Ben to a motel on the outskirts of town. He was arrested without incident, and Jason was informed that Ben's criminal connections would likely lead to a larger investigation. Emily's cooperation and testimony against Ben earned her some leniency, though she faced charges for her role in providing information. The fallout was devastating. Their small, close-knit community buzzed with rumors about what had happened. Jason found himself withdrawing from friends and co-workers, the embarrassment and betrayal too fresh to confront. Lily, thankfully, was too young to understand the full extent of the situation, but she sensed the tension between her parents. Jason and Emily began counseling, both individually and as a couple. The road to rebuilding their relationship was fraught with anger, guilt, and moments of profound sadness. There were days when Jason thought about leaving, about starting over without the weight of Emily's choices hanging over him. But then he'd think of Lily, of the family they had built, and he'd find himself staying, if only to try one more time. One evening, months after the ordeal, Jason found Emily sitting on the porch, staring at the setting sun. He joined her, the silence between them heavy but not uncomfortable. "Do you think we can get past this?" Emily asked, her voice trembling. Jason took a long breath. "I don't know. But I'm willing to try." Emily nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. "I'll do whatever it takes. I promise." Jason didn't respond immediately. Instead, he reached for her hand, holding it gently as the last rays of sunlight disappeared below the horizon. Life didn't return to normal, but it found a new rhythm. Emily worked tirelessly to rebuild Jason's trust, and Jason slowly allowed himself to hope that they could move forward. They sold the house and moved to a new neighborhood, leaving behind the memories that haunted them. Though the scars of their ordeal remained, they served as a reminder of what they had endured and what they still had to fight for. In the end, Jason learned that trust could be shattered in an instant, but rebuilding it required time, patience, and a willingness to confront the darkest parts of themselves and each other.